Today's episode is brought to you by Scientist.com, the life science industry's leading R&D orchestration platform. Scientist.com gives researchers instant access to thousands of pre-vetted suppliers, saving time, reducing costs, and accelerating innovation.
Hi, I'm John Gagliano, Senior Director of Biopharm Catalyst.
Hello, I'm Sheff, known as Sheff Station, a 20-year vet in trading biotech stocks.
And this is Biotech Bulls and Breakthroughs. Biopharm Catalyst is not a registered investment advisory firm, and the views on this podcast are not intended to be financial advice. Guests on this podcast may hold the stocks discussed in personal or other investment accounts. This content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when and where you're joining us from. Welcome once again to another episode of Biotech Bulls and Breakthroughs. Today is Tuesday, April 21st, 2026. We're really excited to have Sheff back on for our monthly episode. As per usual, there is, a ton of things to be discussing within the biotech markets. Sheff, welcome back.
Thank you
always for joining us.
Absolutely.
I guess just kind of to start, XBI at like $136, something like that. Almost, it's like about, I guess that's going to be like a 60-ish% increase over the course of the last year or so. So obviously things going very, very strongly within the biotech markets. And that was something that we had discussed about how strong things were and continued to be. So any thoughts on that, on how the overall markets are doing?
I just think that, with the XBI and the IBB bouncing around, we're seeing that healthcare is a staple industry. And I think biotech is showing the same. It's just showing a lot of resilience. There aren't a lot of days where there's significantly down days in terms of the XBI and the IBB. And if there are, they seem to come back rather relatively quickly. I also think the firming and the cementing of FDA policies and what's occurring in terms of PDUFA approvals, more direction with how companies can get their products accelerated to the market a lot sooner has really helped out with the investor confidence there.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's nice to see it coming into fruition. And, because one thing to talk about it and say, oh, we think that theoretically this is what's supposed to happen, but it's nice to actually see it in the numbers. And that's something that we're obviously seeing. Another obviously big topic right now, for those of you who, most of you I'm sure are aware on the call, but we've got AACR going on right now. Really big conference, one of the big conferences that we track at Biopharm Catalyst, along with some of the other major ones, JP Morgan, ASCO, ESMO, ASH, or some of the other ones that we tend to, have some pretty big catalysts for. Sheff, you mentioned prior to when we started this recording that you were there over the weekend. And for those of you who don't know, Sheff, spent 25, 30 years within the pharma space in oncology, and, has a lot of connections, still a lot of old friends, I guess, in that area. And, are you, did you have any takeaways just from what you've seen at AACR so far?
The takeaways are that I think AACR is a really good setup event for ASCO. And the reason I say that is because a lot of, you're not seeing a lot of plenary sessions with a lot of big news. You're seeing a lot of abstracts and oral poster presentations that are setting up for a lot of these a lot of these breakthrough information that gets shared at ASCO. So as we start to see some of these smaller companies evolve, we'll see abstracts presented, and then shortly after they'll say they're going to have an oral presentation at ASCO or something
Mhm.
like that. I've seen a lot of smaller companies do that. And speaking of smaller companies, I'd seen one at AACR Cality Therapeutics out of San Diego, and one of the gentlemen who used to work with Pfizer, Dr. Mace Rothenberg, he used to be the chair of NSABP, which is it's a cooperative group that works with putting together clinical trials for colorectal cancer. So, and that was 20, 25 years ago when we were just starting to get targeted therapy for colorectal cancer, when we had irinotecan and oxaliplatin. So what, seeing him, 20 plus years later, and really seeing how he is, evolving in terms of moving with smaller companies and getting them set up and scheduled to present at ASCO, lends to what I'm sharing in terms of how a lot of AACR really shows the potential for these smaller companies and
Yeah,
mid-sized companies. But
that's a really good.
the big players don't really play there. Like, you're not
Yeah,
going to see Pfizer, you're not going to see Novartis, you're not going to see the big pharma at AACR. They're all getting set up for ASCO.
yeah, absolutely. And that's obviously another big one that we'll be keeping a close eye on, and have a dashboard on Biopharm Catalyst for as well. So, um, that's really cool though, that you were at least even able to get there for a couple days this weekend. Um, I guess just changing gears real quick. Um, there was somebody who commented on our video the last time that had an interest in the psychedelic space. And this is something that we have definitely touched on in the past. And I know, Chef, you specifically touched on. I mean, you want to kind of bring everyone up to speed on what's going on within that space, just in terms of, some of the regulatory changes that have occurred recently, and anything that is of interest for investors in that space.
Absolutely. That's a great segue because on Saturday the 18th, there was an executive order signed to accelerate access to psychedelic medicine for patients suffering from serious mental illnesses. So, this order really directs the FDA to provide commissioners national priority vouchers to appropriate psychedelic drugs with breakthrough designation that meet the criteria for the program. And that commissioner's national priority voucher streamlines the FDA review process to as little as 1 to 2 months.
Mm,
So, the order directs the Attorney General to initiate review of relevant products on the completion of phase 3 studies to enable rescheduling on FDA approval, streamlining this commercialization process. So, what does this mean for investors? What this means is, yesterday we saw a significant uptick in psychedelic plays. And so this could potentially apply to Compass Pathways, which is ticker symbol CMPS. Um, for their Comp 360. There's also Definium Therapeutics, which is David Frank Tom X-ray, which they have DT120, both of which those products have breakthrough designation that are on track to complete phase 3 clinical studies in 2026. And in particular, Comp 360, which is the Compass Pathways product, has been reported to have been initially under consideration for this commissioner's national priority voucher, but it was previously rejected. So this, obviously, with that being previously rejected, and then this initiative that just moved forward, it puts it back into play again.
mhm,
So, I mean, basically, this represents a confirmation that there's institutional support seen amongst Health and Human Services, FDA leadership, that's extending to the highest level of government. And
mhm.
so, with a catalyst-rich 2026 and like multiple programs completing clinical development over the next 12 months, there's going to be, you know, current regulatory environment is highly favorable to each of these therapies to reach approval. So, some of the companies I talked about, Definium, DFTX, you're on Compass right now. There's DFTX, there's ATAI, which is launching a pivotal program for BPL-003 in the second quarter of 2026, and that's an intranasal psychedelic therapy that they have moving forward. Um, And then, I talked about CMPS and then DFTX, but there's many others. PBM, um, PBM had that's Sisense Biomedical, and very thin trader. Um, that stock spiked to $14 yesterday. And going into the weekend, I think it was 4 or 5. So it's still holding steady at near 10. Obviously, the XBI and the IBB were down today. But the reason I bring that up is just going to what you were saying is that a lot of the valuation on these companies have been lowered over the past year because there hasn't been that support from Health and Human Services and FDA for psychedelic drugs. But again, as I mentioned, as of as of the 18th of April, that all changed. So I think we're going to start seeing more movement. We're going to start seeing, um, um, you know, e- expediency in terms of these products, and so it's another space that's being developed within the biotech space. So I think it
Yeah,
just creates excitement and adds more volatility and productivity to the sector.
yeah, it's almost like, there's a lot on the regulatory front in general, just within biotech, but then when you take something like psychedelics, right, which is clearly, something that has evolved much more recently, right? It kind of doubles down on that. To your point, like if you don't have that support from a regulatory standpoint, it really can impede any progress. So anything that occurs in that space, i.e., something like that occurred, like that what occurred on the 18th, is huge, right? It's almost kind of like it requires it in order to foster the growth within that kind of niche arena in biotech.
Absolutely. And like you talked about, without that support, you don't have big pharma getting behind and pushing with the dollars
Yeah.
that they can push with, because they're not going to touch anything that they don't see being a growth opportunity. A lot of the mid cap and small cap that are getting bought up right now have designated spaces that we've seen grow. GLP-1 being an example, pretty much being something that was just talked about a few years ago to all of a sudden, you have several products on the market and you're seeing, Wegovy and all these products that are being have been accelerated in terms of their usage in the past 6 months to 12 months. So it's been pretty remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. I'm glad that we were able to touch on that. And for anyone listening, as we always say, we do look at the comments. If anyone has any areas that they want us to discuss or look into, we're happy to do it. So, thanks so much for touching on that, Jeff. But
Absolutely.
let's dive into the current watch list and see, sort of what's changed since last month, what is new and upcoming, and yeah, if you want to just kind of walk us through what your plays are currently, what you're thinking about in the next couple months.
Absolutely.
If you find the information that Sheff is presenting on this podcast useful and would like to gain more insights into his trading strategy for individual tickers, you can donate to this charity, the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes, and all individuals donating $300 or more get full access to his VIP private X account. Founded in 2007, the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes is a national leader dedicated to improving the quality of life for children, youth, and adults through participation in sports and physical activity in communities across Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. NWABA's programs focus on helping people who are blind build confidence, gain self-esteem, develop friendships, and reach their greatest potential. You can donate by clicking on the link at the bottom of our podcast page, www.biofarmcatalyst.com/podcast, or via the link in the YouTube video description.
One of the small caps that I think is very interesting, and it points to the fact of the way the new FDA, in terms of of the one study, one designated thorough study that shows statistical significance in terms of efficacy and tolerability, gets approval. That this is really affecting the smaller companies that have had to go through the two-study process in the past and have not pushed through. And the reason I bring that up is because of Outlook Therapeutics, ticker symbol OTLK. Now, as everyone recalls, they had a complete response on December 30th. and it was a third complete response. Now they had been in contact with the FDA several times regarding this third complete response, and they believed that they had aligned with the FDA on what the FDA had asked for. They had done 2 studies. They had done the Norse 2 and the Norse 8. The first study, the Norse 2, showed statistical significance in terms of efficacy and tolerability. But at that time, which was 3 years ago, the FDA wanted to see 2 clinical studies that looked at, in the ophthalmic space with macular degeneration. And so the second study didn't meet the statistical significance. And when the FDA, even though Outlook thought that they were aligned, when the FDA looked at them in December, they said, you're not approvable. We don't have conclusive evidence that your product works, even though they had done 2 studies and then had done a follow-up study to that. So fast forward, obviously, to the February changes where Dr. Makary and Prasad within the FDA went to this one clinical study that you can get approval through one study. And then all of a sudden, it became a game changer. So now you had Outlook, which just held a Type A meeting with the FDA in March. And after the FDA meeting in March, they decided that they were going to elevate that. And they ended up having a meeting that was much higher in terms of the dialogue. It was a dispute resolution meeting. Basically, what occurred there is that on Monday is that they met with the FDA. And it was one person who's a decider. It's an ombudsman to the FDA who reviewed all of the material. There was no new material submitted. The reason this is important is because Outlook is going to try to say, and they have a lot of ground to stand on, that they have already demonstrated statistical significance in one study, which is the Norse 2. So they put out a press release today in the morning that stated that they appreciated the constructive dialogue that they had with the FDA through that FDR, Federal Dispute Resolution process. And they believe that that meeting was an important step in advancing the regulatory strategy. And they look forward to receiving feedback from the FDA in May, which usually is within a month of the meeting. So if you look at today being the 21st, we can expect resolution from a letter and meeting minutes by May 21st. Why is this important for investors? Because this could be the first situation in terms of clinical studies where the one study is actually challenged through the FDA, because Outlook has already done the studies and they feel they're being penalized. And so now with that rule in place, do they have enough justification to stand on the one study?
Yeah.
Many people aren't sure, but this meeting definitely, even in the language of the meeting, sensed that there's going to be productive movement moving forward. So I'll end with this on this Outlook.
That is really interesting and very timely,
isn't it?
What we talked about on the last episode. For anyone who didn't check out our last episode, we dove a little bit into the one pivotal trial and how the FDA is kind of changing its tune, and that's allowing for particularly some of the some of these smaller players to be able to get things approved that maybe they wouldn't have been able to get approved in the past, right? There's a lot less roadblocks, and so it's great to have like a prime example of that right here. And if there's some success with this, right, then there's the chance that this is going to kind of have a snowball effect.
Absolutely. And the one thing that there's one the only negative outcome that could have occurred, which did not occur according to the language in the press release today, is if they just denied them. But obviously that would not occur because of the wealth of data that Outlook has, as well as the fact that it's approved in Europe.
Yeah.
And if people don't know, that this product is bevacizumab, which Genentech owns, and there's patent expiration that's occurred, but it was the first targeted therapy for colorectal cancer. So obviously it's a neovascularization product that works within the ophthalmic space. And so it had been used as a generic for many years, and now they want to get it on the market as an actual approved product. And so that's where they're at right now. So I encourage investors to look at that. There's, again, a formal decision is expected in May in terms of either they'll get approval or they will get a AdCom potentially, or the FDA will ask them in the current study form they have to produce the information that they were looking for in the Type A meeting, or a potentially small study moving forward. But I think there will be success, and I think the amount of success will depend upon, the clarification in the letter, and obviously that's going to drive the stock price. So that's Outlook Therapeutic. Look for that in May. I did want to mention, they've got 3 months left of cash. So they've got about 13 million. They had done an offering in March. There's about 75 million shares in the float, 84 million shares outstanding, and they have a market cap of about 27 million. So you can imagine the market cap if they get bevacizumab through the FDA hurdles here shortly. So on to the next one is Mankind. And Mankind has a PDUFA date of May 29th. That ticker symbol is M, Mary, Nancy, Kid, David. And so they've got, again, that PDUFA is May 29th. They have 126 million in cash. So they have 47 months of cash. And, this is, to my understanding, this is their first time through the FDA with this Furo 6 Ready Flow auto injector, which SCP-111. And so, again, oftentimes when dealing with, with drugs that have gone through the PDUFA process for the first time. And actually, that will be, there's two decisions. The first one is May 29th, as I mentioned. That's a Afrezza. That's for their Inhale 1 product. That's May 29th. The Furo 6 Ready Flow auto injector is July 26th. So they've got 2 regulatory decisions. So I think those are pretty meaty catalysts. You have, again, as I mentioned, the one on the 29th is about a month from now. And then, Furo 6 is in July. But they give for good catalysts in terms of appreciation of stock. And I will go, I'm just going to mention Outlook. We talked about that on the last conference call, and that was about, 18, 19 cents. And that one ran to as high as 40 cents this morning, which is 100% gain before they came out with that news today. And of course, you had a sell-off. So I think that could happen with Mankind. They definitely have a lot of cash. They've already got two approved products, with Afrezza and Tavaso being approved. So just one to keep in mind as well for PDUFA date. The other one is Sing. It's ticker symbol CING. It's Singulate. And they're a company that focuses on the treatment of neurobiological and central nervous system disorders out of Kansas City. And they've got a PDUFA date for May 31st for a regulatory decision for their CTX 1301, which is from their fixed dose pediatric study, antibiotic. And so, they've got 16 months of cash. They've got 18 million in cash. They have a really slow cash burn of about 1 million a month. And so, all that to say, they've run quite significantly. They've run, if you look at the chart, back in April, they had ran to as high as 12, and then they did an offering in mid-March, and then it pulled the stock down to about 5. And it's really pulled back over here in the last week or so, but it's starting to gain traction again, hovering near 6. I think the reason why the volatility, and I've been watching the chart here, is that they have a small share count. They have 12 million shares outstanding. They've got 9.6 million shares that are tradable, and so I think with this one coming up here at the end of May on the 31st, we've got about 28 to 30 trading days that are going to allow for some movement higher. So, if you like trading, and this is a biotech that offers that with the volatility and the small share structure that they do have. Next one is, which is my favorite, and I've owned, for quite a while, is Unicisive, ticker symbol UNCY. And UNCY is followed by a lot of analysts, and a lot of analysts, I mean specifically Piper Jaffray follows them. It's their top pick for 2026. Guggenheim, it's their top pick for 2026. And HC Wainwright, it's their top pick for 2026. And to put that in perspective, I was reading an article from Piper Jaffray, and they talked about their allanthum carbonate is de-risked for potential approval in hyperphosphatemia in chronic kidney disease patients on dialysis, with their PDUFA date being set at June 29th. And they assign a 95% approval, which is the highest that they've had on any product that I'm aware of. Most of the time, these analysts set a 75% at the highest, because oftentimes PDUFA decisions can result in 50-50. But I had mentioned before in prior calls that when a CRL, when a complete response letter was given to Unicisive last year, it had nothing to do with their efficacy or the safety or tolerability of their clinical studies. Their clinical studies were absolutely clean, and they had developed this profile through a 505B pathway. And the thing that they had, there was one deficiency that was related to a third-party vendor. And so when the FDA set with Unicisive, Unicisive made sure that the FDA knew that there was nothing that Unicisive could do in terms of this. So Unicisive said, look, we have two drug manufacturers. We have the one that had the deficiency, or we have a brand new one that we can work with. And the FDA told Unicisive they need to just continue working with the one that had the deficiency, because they could get their drug quicker to the market using them, because the FDA had already worked with them. So they discovered what that deficiency was. They're going to, they've done an inspection. And so basically, it's sending the paperwork in, signing it, and saying, hey, we passed inspection and all is good. But the reason that's important is because the market is absolutely huge here. And, they're going to get TDAPA pricing at the first of the year in 2027 if they get approved. And, that's just allows TDAPA pretty much, it's a way to have access to their drugs. So allanthum carbonate being used 3 times a day instead of a lot of these other phosphatemia agents that are 8 or 9 times a day. So all that to say, their PDUFA date is June 29th. There's a lot of institutional money that's invested in this, and I just think this is a cornerstone play. Whether you play it for a run-up or you play it to hold through, I think it offers a lot of appreciation here moving forward. That's Unicisive, UNCY. Well, let's look at VTGN. That's one I also own, Vistagen. Vistagen, when we talked about this on the last conference, was around 50 cents. Now, Vistagen has $40 million in cash. They only have a market cap of $23 million. So think about that, 23 million, almost 24 million, 23.7 million market cap. They've got 40 million in cash. So they've got 7 months of cash, got 5 months of burn, and they are pretty much, they've got 39 million shares outstanding. They've got 27 million shares of the float. I see this being a more volatile one moving forward as well. We talked about Singular, CING, but this VTGN also offers that volatility that offers appreciation in return as well. What do they have moving forward? They are another company similar to Outlook Therapeutics, but they're not looking for PDUFA. What happened was they had one study that their Palisade study that was positive, and their Palisade 2. Now they're, obviously with the FDA wanting 2 studies. Back when they conducted this, they wanted 2 studies, so they did the Palisade 4. They failed in Palisade 3. Okay, so they have 1 successful study, 1 failed study. The FDA said you need 2 positive studies. So of course they did the Palisade 4. They had already completed Palisade 4 when the FDA said, hey, guess what? You only need 1 study. So Palisade 4 which is going to read out at the end of June, would be a bonus study for them. It would clearly show that they had 2 studies that showed statistical significance in terms of efficacy and tolerability. But if Palisade-4 does not measure out and fails at their primary endpoint, then Vistagen is going to go back to the FDA before moving forward with their new drug application, and they're going to say, look, based on what you talked about one study being approved to get approval, we've already shown success in a prior study. So it's going to be a similar situation with Outlook. They're just going to be later on in the docket with June. So I think right now people are seeing if they are investing, and they're going to see if they get approved here shortly. They're not approved, but if their second study is successful, and if it's not, then the company has ways to move forward with the FDA. But it's a solid catalyst for them, and obviously it's a depression product because the company works in the area to treat anxiety, depression, and other CNS disorders. So they've got that, and then they've also got a product for hot flashes that they're going to submit an IND for. So they're submitting that IND in late May, and they should be hearing acceptance in June. So you've got the phase 3 study at the end of June, and then you've got IND acceptance. So there's a lot that's going to be going on for this small company with 24 million market cap, but 40 million in cash. So I like Vistagen because of the opportunities there. Next one is Guts, ticker symbol GUTS. GUTS is Fractal Health. Fractal Health, last time we were on this call and we were talking about this stock. The stock was at 46 cents. It's up to 58 cents. And what you're saying, why is it up to 58 cents? Well, 2 things. One, because the company has a lot of cash, and they've got catalysts moving forward. They've got 55 million in cash, so they've got about 8 months cash left because they're burning about 7 million a month. They've got about 158 million shares outstanding, about 117 million in the float, and they've got a $92 million market cap. What's important about this company, though, is that they've got the Reveal study that's going to be at the end of June, and that's an open label study. Their open label study that they did in December was a 6-month window, and they were successful in that study. And this Reveal is going to be the open label study in June. And then the Revita, which is their double-blind placebo-controlled study, is going to be in the 4th quarter. All those studies together are going to allow them to put together a de novo application. And if those aren't aware, on the last call, I talked about one of the catalysts being them moving from a pre-marketing authorization, a PMA, which has a much more stringent process of getting approved. The company moved to a de novo. So they talked to the FDA and said, how can we move to a de novo where the efficacy parameters and guidelines aren't as stringent like they are with the PMA. They're less stringent with the de novo, where you just have to show tolerability and safety. Where the efficacy is a bonus, but if you're de novo, it's tolerability and safety that matters. And this is clearly shown tolerability and safety over every study that they've done to date. So you've got that, and then you've got their Revita product, which is going to go. They're going to get feedback from the FDA on that product in June as well. So you've got several different things. You've got 2 catalysts that are big coming up in June with the Reveal study, not the Remain, because that's the 4th quarter study. The Reveal at the end of June, and then a CTA with their device, which is the Revita device, which lowers weight. So a lot of stuff going on. So it pulled back a little today. It's run over the past few days from the mid 50s to 57, 58, and we'll see what happens moving forward. There's a PDUFA in 2 days, GRCE, ticker symbol GRCE. That's Grace Therapeutics. So Grace has $16 million in cash. They're burning about $740,000 a month, so they've got 22 months of cash because they have a slow burn. That's another volatile one that has shown some solid movement here. If you look at the chart, it's actually been pretty impressive. It's gone from the 350 range in January to well over 5 in the mid part of April. It was about 530, 540, and it's pulled back since then down to 350. And I think the reason it's pulled back is investors, it pulled back to 350 and then it's shot up again. But, many would ask, would you be an investor in it now? I wouldn't. And the reason I wouldn't, it's very close to approval. Doesn't mean it won't get approved. It could very well get approved. But my philosophy over the years in trading these PDUFAs is if the company hasn't been denied or smacked down once by the FDA, then that's very rare. Most of the time, as in de novos, 510Ks, anything that you put before the FDA, oftentimes they have questions. And so with PDUFAs, sometimes those questions come in the form of a CRL. And there's a lot of companies that are stumped that say, you told us everything was fine, only to find out that that isn't the case when it comes time to the PDUFA day. So there's very few companies that get through unscathed the first time, but then there are those that do. But I don't want to take a chance with Grace, and this is Grace. It's their first dance to the FDA, and so again, they've got an April 23rd PDUFA. And seeking approval for GTX 104, which is the treatment of patients with aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage. So it's very specific. And then they did a comprehensive data package that was supported by positive results from their phase 3 Strive-On safety trial of this GTX 104. So, I don't know what it's going to do over the next few days, but I think after today is if you're trading it tomorrow, I think you might be safe. The FDA has been on time with their decisions most of the time. And I've seen lately is if it veers toward the end of the day, it can get dicey because it's either approved in the after hours, which if you're looking at a thin trading stock, and people see that, the bottom's gonna fall out, or they will give a decision and then they'll halt the stock. So you can't trade it until the next morning. And guess what? Smart money is always going to get out before the retail investor. That's just the way it works. So, so that's GRCE, and that is going to be again on April 23rd. So, let's look at GOS, ticker symbol GOSS. The GOS is a company that focuses on areas like immunology, inflammation, and oncology diseases. They're looking at one right now for PAH, which is peripheral arterial hypertension, and so they've got seralutinib, and it's also called Procera. But they have got a meeting with the FDA in June because they had data that came out that their phase 3 data that failed in terms of meeting their primary endpoint. So the GOS has plans to meet with the FDA via Type C meeting, where that's gonna occur in June. So the goal for them is to discuss the data and potential regulatory path forward after this phase 3 failed trial in terms of primary endpoint. So that could be a catalyst into that meeting. I definitely think it will be if they PR what the date of the meeting is. That would be helpful for investors. But if you're looking to trade around this, then know that June is the key date. That is probably a good idea to trade around it. The good thing about these decisions, these meetings with the FDA, is oftentimes what I see is the company will continue to move higher into a meeting, even if they know the date or even if they don't. And they only trend down once the meeting has been completed, that typically, and the company has sent out a press release, and then the FDA has 30 days um, or sooner to get meeting minutes to them. That can be a catalyst or not. Today with Outlook, you saw Outlook have that press release, and they um, said, "Hey, we just had our meeting with the FDA. We've got 30 days," and it was at 40 cents, and then it pulled back to 30 cents. And then I think that kind of sets for that time to move up. We could see that same thing happen with Gossamer Bio. And again, they've got, they've got about 4.5 months, 4.8 months. They burn a lot of cash. They've got 77 million in cash, but they're burning about 16 million a month, which means they've got 5 months left. So they'll have plenty through this June decision. I think, if you're looking for a longer time frame, they're going to need at some point to raise, probably in October, in August or September. So that's Gossamer. Let's look at TCRX. That's T-Scan Therapeutics. And they've got data coming up. They're going to have data that they're going to present at ASCO. And they're going to share early clinical data on patients treated in their cohort C of their ALOA study in the second quarter. That's one of the clinical studies, one of their catalysts. They're going to launch a pivotal trial for their TSC 101 in the second quarter. And again, like I mentioned, they're going to share data patients treated in cohort C in the ALOA study, and that's going to be at ASCO. So we definitely know that. And then they're going to initiate a phase 1 study. That TSC 102 A01, TSC 102 A03 in the second half of 2026. Now they've got and they've guided on March 4th, when they came out with their earnings, they have 152 million in cash to provide a runway into the second half of 2027. So this is a small cap stock with a lot of money. So I think we saw it run we saw it run on Monday big time. But over the past few days, it's really run from the 115, 120 range. It ran to as high as 150 yesterday, and it pulled back to 127 today. So, it's one to watch. It's definitely an ASCO play, as I mentioned. A lot of these plays are, and the one I'm going to talk about next is an ASCO play, and that's ticker symbol I, Mary Paul, and this is Imutep. They completed a single ascending dose study portion of their IMP 761 study. It was well tolerated across all dose levels. And they were going to present more intensive data and phase 1 results at not ASCO, but EULAR, the EULAR conference. And they're going to have a plenary session at EULAR. The thing I like about this is they give you a specific date. That date is going to be June 4th. So they have a June 4th presentation for IMP 761. And I think at 60 cents, it's a pretty solid catalyst trader. So you get in, you trade up to around June, and you see what the stock can do. Of course, it gets to 90 cents, looking at 50% gain. Gets to $1.20, 100% gain. So it's just for those traders that like to get in and really see what biotech has. This is one, where they can do that. They've got 152 million in cash. 52-week low is 29 cents. Their 52-week high is 350. They've got about 140 million shares in the float, 147 million outstanding. So they can move. They can definitely move. And I think having a catalyst date like this is going to allow them to move because they have a specific date. A lot of companies don't have specific dates. So that's really helpful. Let's look at Mary, Dollar, Apple, Indigo, MDAI. MDAI filed their de novo 510 application in June of 2025. And typically, they 9 to 10, excuse me, every to 9 to 12 months is usually the time frame that the FDA takes with the de novo before approval. So the company just had their earnings in March, um, the latter March, and the CEO basically said they're expecting approval of their AI burn device, their artificial intelligence burn device, um, for the treatment of burns. Um, and this device is able to detect burns and help heal burns through AI technology. It's pretty amazing. This company has garnered over $100 million from federal grants. They just got $30 million in April, so they're definitely well funded. Um, they've got right now they've got 12 million in cash that's not tied to um, grants from the federal government. But they have a low cash burn. They've got 14 and a half months of cash. They've got a $57 million market cap. Their 52-week high is 320. 52-week low is $1.13. They've got 22 million shares in the float, 31 million outstanding. And this is going to happen. It's just a matter of when the FDA is going to, give them approval. It's hard to say what the stock's going to do. I mean, over the past 2 to 3 weeks, the stock's gone from, you know, um, actually a couple of weeks, it's gone from, $1.20 range. Look at this chart. I mean, it's gone from $1.20 in, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago to over $2, which, is a 70% gain. It's pulled back to about 181. But I think anytime you start talking artificial intelligence and you start talking, a device that can, help burn victims recover and rehabilitate, it's pretty substantial and pretty significant, especially in terms of the biotech industry. So I think we'll see more of that moving forward, but this is one you need to watch. So I like this one, MDAI, and I do own it. Look at PYPD. So this is Polypid. They've had a successful phase 3 study. They have a product that is used in surgical patients that have cancer, colorectal cancer, and so they developed this polymer lipid encapsulation matrix. It's called the Plex platform to address these unmet clinical needs or medical needs. So they have stated since February and March that they, upon getting submitting their NDA shortly after, which should be any day now, shortly after that, they're going to announce a partner because they want to have a partner in place to sell this device. And so I think it's going to be, beneficial for the company. And it's going to be more beneficial for investors because I don't know what is going to happen to their market price, their market cap, but their market cap is relatively low. It's only 87 million. They've got 10 million shares in the float, 19 million outstanding. And so I think the main thing to know is the NDA submission and the partnership, which they're saying is going to be a big medical company that's going to be able to really push this through in terms of their support once they get approved. So let's look at ACHV. ACHV, I've got about 10 minutes. I'm going to push through these. ACHV, they've got a June 20th presentation, or excuse me, PDUFA date in smoking cessation. Cystosnicline is their drug that they have, and the PDUFA, as I mentioned, is June 20th. They, about a month and a half ago, ran into some issues in manufacturing. There's some deficiencies in one of the manufacturing facilities. So unless those are cleaned up by the time the FDA gives them their approval, they're going to get a CRL. It could be a minor one too. It could be a 2-month turnaround, but who knows? But I think we're going to start to see more activity in the stock, over the next month, because that's a huge market. And so I think that's going to give them an opportunity to do some things, and investors who decide to invest in it. So that's ACHV, Achieve. Um, Look at Connect Bio, CNTB. So Charlie, Nancy, Tomboy. They've got data from their Rademikibart, their Seabreeze Stat Asthma clinical study. It's phase 2 study, top line data in H1, the first half 2026. But the company on their site stated that they have June data. So before it said H1, now it's June, specifically June data. So they're going to have June data, and I think that helps out investors a lot, because it's not so it's not just a first half, and we're not just trying to figure out when that is going to be. So a stock that you can trade around that date. I don't know when in June. They just said they're going to have June data, and then they're going to have September data as well. So those are 2 month time frame dates that we have. Not the specific date, but I think that's the best they've got so far, and that's pretty good, especially when you're dealing with biotech stocks. Let's look at IVVD, Indian Victor David. They're $1.60. They've got a phase 3 study. They have a long COVID program, and so that data is going to read out mid-year. It's their VYD 2311. It's their declaration study, and that's going to be I say mid-year, but it's Q3. Their top line data. And they're $1.60 right now. They've got $207 million in cash. They burn about $5 million a month, so they have 40 months of cash. So that's a good position, and they have a deep pipeline. So they're not a one-trick pony. They've got ADG20, they've got Pimgarda, they've got several other products as well. So that's one I'm watching. I don't own that, but I'm definitely watching Invivid. PMN has that's Paul, Mary, Nancy. That was a stock I was talking about back in October when it was 35 cents. They did this big reverse split. Stock ended up at $6 from 35 cents. And then it ran 2 to 3 months ago. It ran as high as almost $30. It's pulled back significantly since then. But they have an ongoing phase 1B trial that's going to have a readout in mid-year, probably June or July. It's a 100-patient placebo-controlled study that's designed to provide definitive data that could allow the direct progression of a pivotal phase 3 study. And that trial focuses on comprehensive panel of biomarkers, especially p-tau-17, which has been shown to correlate directly with clinical outcomes and serves as a key indicator of target engagement. So significant data catalysts are approaching, and they're going to have this interim biomarker data expected in mid-2026 and final top-line results by year in 2026. So, management's already stated they've had strong business development interest from large pharma companies due to their PMN's 310's unique mechanism and promising safety data. So, I think that's one to watch. It's again, they've got $170 million in cash. They've got $5 million in the float, so it's a very low float stock. And I think if there was more of a time frame on when data was coming out, traders would be more apt to trade around it, because it is one of the more expensive plays in terms of biotech. If you're looking at smaller cap and not necessarily mid cap and large cap, in the smaller cap space, it's bigger. So that's that. And then OSTX. And I like OSTX a lot. That's one that I own. And OSTX is awesome because, and I say awesome because I love what they're working for. They're, the number one killer of dogs in the world is car accidents. Number 2 killer of dogs in the world is osteosarcoma. And they've got a drug that they're working with. It's the OS2 HER2. where they're trying to get approval, accelerated approval for osteosarcoma in animals and people. They have had meeting with the FDA this year. They're going to have 4 meetings this summer with different agencies. So the FDA in the U.S., they're going to have a meeting with European agency, and so they have the U.S., the EU, the U.K., and they're all working towards regulatory steps to get accelerated approval by clearly by the end of the year. Initially, it was September, but then what happened was there's this technical situation with the FDA where because their meeting with the FDA got pushed from March 30th, and usually there's a 6-month period with accelerated approval, they would have had to have had the meeting by March 30th to be under the accelerated approval 6 months to get approved by September 30th, which would have been able to grant them the priority voucher, which you get a priority review voucher, you can sell it for 150, 200 million. So what made that change? Well, the FDA changed and they put in section 6604, which is an extension of technical clarification. And so what it does is it makes 2 principal statutory changes. First, it replaces the prior sunset provision, with a new deadline of September 30th that the FDA is willing to work through. So the FDA can continue to award vouchers for qualifying approvals until that date. So the status doesn't oppose a separate deadline for obtaining a rare pediatric disease designation, but it gives them flexibility for sponsors who develop timelines that extend several years. So in the case of osteosarcoma, they're willing to be flexible. And so I think the company is looking at potentially early October, late October, to get accelerated approval for this OST HER2 product in dogs for osteosarcoma. So, and then just another technical thing. The second is that this amendment clarifies that the priority review voucher user fee is due upon submission, but the FDA I believe the FDA helped them with their submission, the FDA fee. So I think, the company is on the right path right now. I think they removed the biggest overhang in terms of cash because initially they had 1 month of cash and then they did a private offering. They have $8 million in cash now, which gives them 7 months, 7 months of burn. And so by the time they're out of cash, it'll be October, and hopefully by then they have their accelerated approval voucher where they'll be able to sell it for 150 or 200 million. The market cap right now is 54 million. They've got 39 million shares outstanding, 36 million in the float. So I like this company a lot, and I think OSTX should be valued a lot higher than where it's at right now at 138. I've got a few more to go over real quick. ACRS, $4.20. They've got top-line data in a phase 1b study. It's ACRS. And so, that study, it's a positive. They've got a bispecific antibody, which is AT1052, and they're expecting these top-line results in the second quarter. And so that's one that has a clinical catalyst. I think it's going to be really strong. The one I'm looking at and I own shares in is HCWB, which is HCW Biologics. So HCWB. They've got about 6 months of cash. HCWB. And the reason I like this one is because they've got data in the first half, phase 1 data. It's in a dose escalation study that's designed to treat up to 30 patients. And what I love about this is that it's a phase 1 study in alopecia areata. Now, if you recall, yesterday Nectar came out with data in alopecia areata. And that stock went from $85 to about $104 a share. So it's significant because what they're going to do and look for in this study is the primary objectives are evaluate the safety, where this HCW 9302 drug is injected under the skin subcutaneously, and they're going to determine the recommended dose level to advance to later phase clinical studies. So their preliminary human data readout is expected in the first half. Last time they had a data readout, the stock was extremely low at 40 cents, and they said in their press release, we have positive data. Stock traded almost 50 plus million shares and surged to $1.35, $1.40. So it was up almost 200% or a little over 200%. So I think that can happen with this one. And I really like the fact that it's a low float. They have 6 million shares in the float, 7 million outstanding. And it's a low float play that offers a lot of volatility, especially if in this multi-center dose escalation study, it's positive, which I think it will be. Most of those studies are typically positive because they don't have hard measures in terms of efficacy that a lot of these later stage phase 2 and phase 3 studies have to show. And the final one I want to look at for everyone is NXRP. NXRP is one of these psychedelic plays that was up significantly yesterday. It's run over the past week or so from $1.70 to about $3.20, and it's NXRP, and that's called NRX Pharma. And they had a Type C meeting that provided a clear NDA pathway for their NRX 100, which is supported by real-world evidence and a broader proposed indication, which significantly de-risks the program. So on February 17th, they said they had an in-person Type C meeting with the FDA for the Division of Psychiatry Products and the Center for Drug Evaluation, or CDER, during which oral guidance outlined a path for filing an NDA and getting full approval of NRX 100, which is a preservative-free ketamine formulation based on the existing controlled clinical founder, Jonathan Javitt, who helped develop this. But what the FDA highlighted is the FDA required no additional non-clinical studies or bridging studies for a review of their NRX 100 NDA. And importantly, they told them that they can pursue a broader indication in the treatment-resistant depression in the context of suicidality, rather than limiting the label to acute suicidality. So they plan to provide additional details following the receipt of that meeting, which they've got already. And, I think this outcome significantly reduces the uncertainty with their second quarter NDA submission. And then they've got a PDUFA date of July 29th. So this is significant, I think. And I think we've seen the volatility in this play. We saw it as high as $3 yesterday. It pulled back today. But NRXP is one that has the July 29th PDUFA date. So it's definitely one to watch, one to look at, and one to continue to evaluate as a trader, especially as some of we get through these other catalysts, these catalysts that we've talked about. But there's a lot going on, and that's it from here in terms of catalysts in the second quarter and early third quarter.
Thanks so much, Sheff. That was great as always. We obviously went through a ton of information. And again, really appreciate you walking us through all of that. Obviously, as usual, there's just so much to go through. So
yeah,
but it's a very exciting time. Like you mentioned, 2026 is just a big year for a lot of these catalysts, and they're clearly operating in a lot of different arenas, right? A lot of different indications, a lot of different therapeutic areas. So I think no matter kind of what area you're focused on, there's going to be something for you. And it should be really interesting to see how some of these PDUFAs play out, how some of that the one pivotal trial stuff from the FDA plays out as we move forward. So again, really appreciate the time. For everyone on the call, as always, listen to this episode a couple times, take notes, feel free to ask us any questions that you have on any of these. And if there's any other areas that you want us to cover, please comment in our comment section. And as always, just, like and subscribe to our channel if you like this content and want to see more. But really appreciate the time, Sheff. Thanks so much. And we will see everyone next month for another episode.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John. And take care, everyone. Thank you for watching and
Yep.
listening as well. Bye now.
Have a good one, guys.